Alright, surprise, surprise, we got some more rule changes in the NFL, with a big benefit for the Eagles' new returner. Plus, Philly's bringing in several more top 30 visits. And could the Birds really go after receiver in the first round? Also, Vic Fangio has big plans to turn Zack Baun into the next Andrew Van Ginkel. And owner Jeffrey Lurie shares a deal as close with Haason Reddick, while Nick Sirianni didn't give the most glowing endorsement for Cam Jurgens. So let's break it down. But first, let's run it. Hey guys, well, the NFL is dead. Or at least the onside kick is.
You maniacs! You blew it up!
Is that a bit dramatic? I don't know, maybe so, but I'll let you be the judge. After the NFL owners voted to approve a new hybrid kickoff for a trial year, in a way too long to read proposal featuring landing zones, setup zones, safety kicks, and a whole lot of other new stuff.
I didn't understand a word you just said, little guy.
Well, that's okay because I didn't either. Thankfully, for those visual learners like me, it's basically going to be an adaptation of the XFL kickoff rules since the NFL admitted that the paltry 22% kickoff return rate wasn't competitive enough. AKA, profits aren't being maximized by a boring kick it out of the end zone on nearly 70% of kickoffs. But now if the ball is kicked out of the end zone, it'll result in it being placed at the 30-yard line. Now, I saw some reports saying that it was the 35-yard line and others that said the 30-yard line, so I'm not really 100% sure. However, the latest revision said the 30-yard line, so that's what I'm going to go with. Either way, are you in favor of this move, or are you like countless others who said, what happened to the game I fell in love with? Not gonna lie, it's kind of hard to grasp all these recent changes and the continued change. However, I'm kind of in favor of this move, especially because like PFN's Anthony DeBona pointed out, the Eagles signing Isaiah Rodgers and Parris Campbell looks even better after these changes. Because in case you weren't aware, Campbell averages 24.4 yards per return in his NFL career, and Rodgers averages an impressive 27 yards per return in his NFL career. Meanwhile, Boston Scott averaged just 22.8. Even so, I get it. The new change is a bit confusing and is definitely going to take some time to get used to. But again, I'm actually in favor of it because it should at least add some more creativity and action and competitiveness and everything else. Although the new onside kick part is just, well, honestly terrible. Where now onside kicks can only be done in the fourth quarter by a team that's trailing. Yet they must declare to officials that they plan to go with an onside attempt beforehand. And yes, to answer your question, take away the complete element of surprise.
I will loudly announce that we are not going to attack. And then we attack.
Like, this is idiotic. Not only are you making it completely telegraphed, but why on earth does it have to be in the fourth quarter? Sure, it doesn't happen often, but there have been a number of games where teams surprise with an onside kick early and it can completely change the outcome of a game. Please tell me I'm not the only one feeling this way, or at least what am I not considering? Oh yeah, the other part the NFL got wrong was the fact that they plan on playing games on Christmas Day again, which for those tracking falls on a Wednesday this year.
But it's Christmas Eve.
Oh, Merry Christmas.
It's ironic that the No Fun League claims player safety for the hip drop tackle, but then is perfectly fine moving it to a very shortened, abbreviated week and playing on a Wednesday. Okay, sorry, I know that's really pessimistic. So to counter that, they did at least get the trade deadline right after voting to push it back 1 week until the Tuesday after the Week 9 games. Again, that's a positive change, and we could be looking at more positives soon with Howie Roseman citing the Birds aren't done making moves ahead of the draft. As the Enquirer's Jeff McClain also suggests it might be for a cornerback, saying despite Howie's sticking up for James Bradberry, he's not buying it, and that it's likely we see a trade or investing early on a draft pick at that position. Obviously, that's a lot of hype and nothing definitive, but like I've said a number of times, I am perfectly fine with us investing in a cornerback early. Anyway, speaking of hype though, there's no shortage of that for newly acquired linebacker/edge rusher Zack Baun, with Roseman saying Baun was targeted very early in free agency due to Vic Fangio's style, while also alluding to the fact that they see Baun being able to be utilized much like Andrew Van Ginkel was in Miami. I mean, that's some serious praise. Obviously, he's got to live up to that hype, but remember, Cam Jordan had even said previously in New Orleans that Baun is very underrated and can make an impact if given the chance. So I'm definitely more excited about it, much like CJ Gardner Johnson's return and how he instantly changes the mentality of the defense.
I think the word toughness is just the word that we were looking to add tough pieces. And when you go back and look at Chauncey, of the things that he added when he was here in 22, you know, you saw a guy that was willing to throw his body around and play physically tough. And I just, you know, and play mentally tough too. Like there's two pieces of toughness, the physical toughness and the mental toughness. You know, whether he had a good play, whether he had a bad play, he was playing his butt off the next play with amazing effort. And and some of the physical plays that he made too. I mean, there was a tackle in the NFC Championship game where he came up and made an awesome open field tackle on McCaffrey on the sideline, who we know is not an easy guy to tackle. And he made an unbelievable physical play, got up with excitement. Like, I'm really excited about the toughness that Chauncey brings back, and he plays with constant energy, and that's contagious.
I'm sorry, CJ was just made for Philly. However, while Sirianni isn't lacking any confidence in the prodigal son, his response about Cam Jurgens being able to take over for Jason Kelce created a little uncertainty.
I don't have to make that decision anywhere near for a long, long time, and so we'll see. We got a lot of time. We got walkthroughs to go through. We got training camp. We got OTAs. As far as what that looks like, Cam's got a ton of reps. If it is Cam, he's got a ton of reps doing that too. And like, Jason didn't take every snap at center last year in practice, so I'm really confident that he can do it. We're really confident, but we'll see what happens.
I think we all realize there's still plenty of time. Plus, let's not forget that Sirianni is the master of saying a ton of things without really saying anything. So similar to him not committing to right guard last offseason, it's basically the same thing. Look, I think Beef Jerky is the guy and he's going to be fine, but I'm curious how many of y'all think Beef Jerky's actually going to struggle at center? Sure, nothing's for certain, and if he doesn't do well, then maybe it'd be worth drafting a guy like Oregon's Jackson Powers Johnson, since he'd add a lot of depth and versatility, whether it's at guard or center. I don't know, I'm still of a mindset that we have to go defensive player in the first round. And to that point, we did have a couple more top 30 visits announced, with the Eagles bringing in Kentucky linebacker Trevin Wallace, who, in case you're not familiar with this dude, is physically gifted and athletic, with multiple scouts mentioning his closing speed and relentless pursuit. And the Enquirer's Devin Jackson also noted that he plays a lot off his instincts, but his eye discipline could use some cleanup. Ultimately, I'm just glad we keep looking at linebackers. By the way, based on some mock drafts that I've seen, it feels like Wallace is probably a late day 3 pick, but at least you're getting some more information about a guy like this, which is another reason the Birds are bringing in UCLA standout pass rusher Laiatu Latu, with the 6'5", 265-pound 23-year-old recording 13 sacks last season and being an absolute beast to handle for opposing offensive linemen. And honestly, the only main concern seems to be his medical history, since he had to medically retire after a neck injury earlier in his college career. But assuming everything checks out, I'd find it hard to believe this dude is still available at 22. Now, one guy who will be available at that number is Texas' Xavier Worthy, as the Eagles continue to be linked with growing interest in the wide receiver. And yes, obviously, everyone knows his ridiculous 4.2 speed, but he's shown that he can be more than just a burner. But while we're on that topic, Nick Sirianni is hoping to get better production from former Colts and Giants receiver Parris Campbell, with the two being reunited after Indy, so it wouldn't be a surprise to see a bigger role, specifically because Sirianni said Kellen Moore's been handling the bulk of offensive work so far this offseason, which is fantastic news, and we can only hope it stays that way.
It's not the way it's going to work.
Yes, it is.
No, it is not.
No, it is not.
It's also worth mentioning that owner Jeffrey Lurie spoke today addressing several different topics about Jalen Hurts, saying he's confident in QB1 and who he is, and the same to be said about Nick Sirianni, while he's never hired a play-calling head coach with the exception of Chip Kelee.
Philly? Yeah, let's do it.
All right, while that may not be true, my hope is that Lurie's statement about Haason Reddick means we're headed in the right direction.
Really wouldn't want to talk about any player, no matter who, under contract to our team or another team, and I'll let that play itself out. We don't have any games for, 5 more months. That'll play itself out. He's, by the way, a terrific player, great person, great background in Philadelphia, and I just see it'll play itself out in a very good way.
Come on, why else would he say that unless he's envisioning an extension getting done with number 7? Anyway, getting back to the wide receiver 3 question, there's several viable options, and anything's better than Quez Watkins with him headed off to Pittsburgh. Which is why I caught up with Pro Football Network's Anthony DeBona to talk about all these options and everything else around Eagles news. First off, let's start with the wide receiver 3 expectations, because everyone's been talking about it. There's other guys rumored. There's recent signings of Parris Campbell, which we'll get into. And Nick Sirianni even referenced the offense and Kellen Moore today as well. But you did a great piece, an article about analyzing Philadelphia's wide receiver 3 position. I've got a link in the comments or in the description if anybody's interested. But break it down for those that maybe haven't read it or just checking it out. Why will wide receiver 3 be different for Philly this year, especially in a Kellen Moore offense?
Well, I think it's just going to be used for the first time that we've seen in Sirianni's tenure as head coach, because in the previous 3 years, they've only targeted the wide receiver 3 45.6 times a season for just 321.8 yards, and they've only had 28 receptions per season as well. So, it's just they basically going to go from not using the position at all or using them just as a decoy, as we saw with Quez Watkins last season, where they just say, oh, he's fast, so defenses have to honor him, but they never really throw it to him. So, I mean, in Kellen Moore's offense, over his tenure, 5 years as offense coordinator, his wide receiver 3 has averaged 47.2 receptions per season on 77.2 targets per season for 645.6 yards per season. So it's almost double in each category. So clearly there's going to be an emphasis on the position. We've already seen Philadelphia add 2 veteran players that can potentially play that spot in Philadelphia this offseason. So it'll be fun to see what they do. And there's different players that they have and different body types that they have at that position as well.
That is the interesting part. Like you say, there's a couple different options you can go with, and obviously, they're not done based on Howie Roseman's comments, not necessarily for wide receiver 3. Who knows? We'll see where they go with. But you do talk about Parris Campbell as well. You mentioned him several different times on Twitter. Where do you feel like he fits in as of right now? Again, there's so much more time to go, so I'm kind of putting you on the spot. But still, with the speed, athleticism, everything that he brings, what are your overall thoughts and takeaways on Parris Campbell?
Well, he's personally a player I thought they were going to target last offseason before he signed with the Giants because of his experience with Sirianni. And he kind of offers that same skill set with the speed that Quez Watkins has, but just a little bit more experience being used in different positions. And like I said, that relationship with Sirianni is important. We've seen him bring in players that he has connections to in the past. So that's certainly a factor. But if they want to kind of replicate what they've done in previous years where Watkins was the speedster, then Campbell's kind of more that body type. And he has the 4.3 speed that he showed off coming out of the draft. So he would fit that role, but they also brought in Devontae Parker first, and before they brought in Campbell, who offers kind of the complete opposite. He's strictly played outside in his career. Over 80% of his snaps have been outside. So if they want to kind of move Devontae Smith or A.J. Brown in the slot more, then Parker would be on the field more. So this just gives them options. They'll have, and I'm sure they might draft somebody too. So they've apparently interested in Xavier Worthy. They are going to host Brendan Rice on a top 30 visit. So their work isn't done, and it's clear that they're going to emphasize using more than just Dallas Goedert, Smith, and Brown as their pass catchers.
It's we should probably pause for just a brief second and say goodbye to Quez Watkins. We've both a number of times going back and forth talking about Quez. I think everyone's happy about it, but hey, good luck to him, I suppose, in Pittsburgh. Is there any I guess dislike for this move, or him just saying, all right, we'll see you?
I mean, I tweeted about it. It's just best for both sides to move on because it was clear that he was given maximum effort in Philadelphia, and they kind of just played him out of necessity because they didn't have anybody with speed that they could put out there. So whenever he was healthy, he was kind of thrown out there. But when he was actually put in positions where they needed him, he fell short multiple times.
Yeah. It was infuriating to say the least. So you know what? Hey, maybe he finds it somewhere else. But you mentioned the speed aspect, and it is exciting, obviously, to get a burner, a guy who could stretch the defense, a number of ways that you can impact on the field, especially if you can or will play with effort. Now, you also talked on or kind of touched on Xavier Worthy there. That's that's kind of an automatic. Like if someone says speed and you're looking at this draft class, naturally you're going to take the guy that has the NFL record, for the 40. What are your thoughts on him? Because I've seen, kind of from both sides, there's the knock that you could say, not always, I'm not saying it's every single time, but like not always does the fastest player from the 40 time translate to a great NFL player. However, you see there's scouts out there and executives that have been saying, no, it's not just the speed. This dude's I think the quote was like a Madden 99 speed rating, but he's also got the fluidity and the movements and the route running and things like that. But where are you in terms of Xavier Worthy? And is that a good move? Is that a realistic move for Philly in the draft?
I don't see why it wouldn't be realistic because, like you said, they've added Parris Campbell. They've already let go of Quez Watkins. So if they're looking for a player with game-breaking speed, it doesn't get any better than Worthy. It's just a matter of if they're actually going to invest because he'll probably take the 22nd pick if they want to take him because he's not going to last. After the combine he had, he's probably not going to last until the 50th or 53rd pick. So it's just, are they actually going to take a receiver that early? But he does have the skill set. He's not just the speedster. He's kind of similar to Tank Dell from last year who went off in Houston. So now I feel like everybody in the NFL is going to be giving those smaller receivers maybe a second chance or a second look compared to where they normally would have just dismissed them because of their size, because Worthy's not the contested catcher that Tank Dell is, but his speed is just too absurd to pass up on. And I don't think it would be crazy for Philadelphia to take it if they really are just focused on the offensive side of the ball this offseason.
It would be a whole lot of fun. I'm not going to lie. I think everybody realized that, but you add another weapon like that to the offense. And heck, we'll get into more of the hip drop and all that other stuff. But the way the NFL is shifting, or I shouldn't say shifting, it's just continued to go because it's always offensive minded. But still, it's like, all right, hey, you know what? You want to add in more of the skill players and get someone else who's dynamic like that. I don't know if you have enough of the passes or the catches to go around to I guess help everyone to eat at the table, so to speak. However, it would be exciting. Are there any, and maybe to put you on the spot just with a prediction here, and in terms of who we have on the roster, and there's naturally lots of other good options out there, not even just Xavier Worthy. We got Malachi Corley, Ricky Pearsall. There's a number of guys that have been thrown out there, but who is your favorite? If you could take your pick, and you could just say anyone in the draft, so I'm not going to limit it necessarily. Realistic options, we would say Marvin Harrison Jr. or someone like that, but realistic options, someone in the draft or someone currently on this roster, who are you banking on as wide receiver 3?
I actually think, like, if you had to go with who's on the roster right now, I think Parris Campbell is the front runner, just because of his experience with Sirianni. I feel like his speed fits in well. He can do kind of the creative things that Kellen Moore likes to use at times with the screen or motions or whatnot. So he's just a natural fit. But as far as an outside option, I already mentioned him having a top 30 visit with the Eagles, but Brendan Rice makes a lot of sense because even though he was at USC, he had a lot of production on a very limited workload where he got a ton of touchdowns where he wasn't being targeted 150 times a season. So he's not going to be coming in here with expecting a huge workload. They've already shown their interest. He's a maximum effort guy, which is kind of the complete opposite of Watkins. So he's going to go 100% if it's blocking, if it's just running a route, even if he's not catching the ball. It's just he's a guy that seems like he's all about the team. He's a big body receiver, so that'll help in the red zone and whatnot. So I just feel like, and if they have to move on eventually from A.J. Brown in the future, years down the road, whatever the case might be, he's kind of that same similar body type and style where he can kind of step in that role as well, which they really do have to think about it. Nobody wants to address it, but there's going to reach a point where they won't be able to pay both of them, and their salary cap numbers are going to be added on at the end, and they're eventually going to catch up to each other. So it's something they have to address, and given the talent in this year's draft, I feel like it would make no sense to not take a receiver at some point.
Yeah, I like it. Again, you add weapons. You're not have to spend too much in terms of draft capital, things like that, if you're going with a selection of that nature. But again, we've gone back and forth on this, and let's get into more of the draft visits because that's where everyone's mind is transitioning naturally. Free agency it's dying down. We're not going to say that there's necessarily no more moves, and we can get into that in a second as well with Howie saying, we're not done of sorts. But there's been a couple top 30 visits scheduled, and so the most recent one I think that I saw was the Trevin Wallace, linebacker for Kentucky. Where are you at on him? I've seen some people that have mentioned some potential that he has. There are some flaws that you brought up, but where are we at on him? And is this, I guess, would he be a good potential option, or why not, for that matter?
Well, I was a little harsh with my tweet about him, comparing him to former Eagle Davion Taylor. But
I was going to say,
it's just, Trevin Wallace, he's a better linebacker than Taylor was coming out of college. But the thing that scares me is it's just a lot of potential that they have to work with. And given their situation at linebacker, they kind of need somebody that they can use right away. I mean, granted, they're hoping that Nakobe Dean and Devin White are the guys probably this season. But Wallace wouldn't be a bad developmental option. I mean, over the past couple of years, they've really valued moving on. Wallace would be a good option.
I don't mind it necessarily. I still always, and I get that we can't just hone in on one player. So, I take this with a grain of salt. But Edgerrin Cooper is the guy that is still just like, take him, don't worry about anybody else. But it is still, I think, important to note, and as we call out here with the linebackers and the visits, you mentioned it a number of times. We covered it in the last episode that we did together. The top 30 visits are huge. I mean, it's massive. The amount of information not only that you can get on players, but usually where this leads for most teams, certainly the Eagles, in draft selections, you can glean a lot from that. So it's like, okay, who are they visiting with? All right, there's probably a little bit more interest in these types of players. And one, maybe more than any others, is Laiatu Latu. I think everybody knows the ability that he has, the production that he's had in college, UCLA, pass rusher. There's some skepticism as far as, he might want to be a firefighter after his career, whatever. So, let's not bring up Danny Watkins or anything like that. But still, there's some medical issues and things like that. You get your team doctors to take a look at him. Thoughts on Laiatu Latu? Did he fit well? Any concerns with the injuries there? Just overall takeaways on that side.
I mean, for people that don't know, 3 years ago, he had to medically retire for a neck injury that he dealt with in the offseason. So I think that's terrifying. But We saw the Eagles take Grant Calcaterra, who had to medically retire, and we see it. He's been a decent player when called upon, but with Latu, it's just he might not even make it to 22. To be honest, if his medicals check out, he's just too good of a pass rusher. He has an unbelievable skill set in terms of just beating offensive tackles off the snap. Nobody can even touch him at times. It's kind of crazy to watch because usually you'll see guys they'll have their first move stopped and they have to go to a counter. This guy already has counters before they even get a hand on him where he's ducking under guys' arms when they're trying to catch him or just beating them with speed. He's just an unbelievable pass rusher. And if the Eagles are going to move on from Haason Reddick or Josh Sweat next season, whatever the case might be, he's the perfect plan to have in place to be their replacement. And he can contribute right away as well.
You can never have too many pass rushers. We know that. And, the whole Danny Watkins comparison, it's not fair. I've said it before. Some people don't realize the sarcasm and everything else. So I'll say it again. You never know. He could be perfectly fine. It'll work out. And also the medical staff, Philly being able to evaluate him themselves makes a bigger difference. So we'll see. It will be interesting. To your point, though, it's almost like if all checks out and you have no concerns about the medical side, then it's impossible, basically. It feels that way of him falling to 22. So it's more of like a trade-up type of scenario. And we've seen that with a number of different guys. We talk about the corner position, which we can get into here in a second as well, but also center. A little bit of a controversial statement, I suppose, from Howie, from not Howie Roseman, from Nick Sirianni at the NFL annual meeting. He was asked about thoughts on the center position, Cam Jurgens, and his comment was a little strange. You don't just come right out. I get that we were a long way off from camp and everything there, but Cam Jurgens was the drafted replacement for Jason Kelce, so you would kind of assume that he just goes out there and says, like, oh yeah, he's for sure the guy, no concerns, no worries. But his comment left the door open, so to speak. Where are you at, I guess, first off, before we get into any draft prospects and things like that, but is there any concern with Cam Jurgens on your side, given his statements there, or just overall takeaway from the thoughts on that side?
I'm not too concerned. I mean, he kind of just said like, oh, he has snaps there, he has experience there, and if he is the guy, which is what people are going to pay attention to, which is fair, but also if you look back at Sirianni's history, he just doesn't usually like publicly handing jobs to guys. He wants, especially if there is any kind of doubt, like with right guard last season. He wasn't definitive saying that Cam Jurgens was the guy. He was saying that, they're going to have competition, whatever the case might be. Like Jurgens has the upper hand, but whatever the case might be, we'll see how it plays out. So, I mean, who knows? They already added Tyler Hennessy, so they brought in the veteran that has some center experience in the NFL. So I'm sure they're going to want Jurgens to compete and technically earn the job on the field, but we'll see. It's just when you look at the draft, you can't help but notice that Jackson Parris Johnson is linked to them by a lot of people. They think that he talked about potentially playing for the Eagles and watching Jason Kelce at the Senior Bowl. So, I mean, it would make sense because he has experience playing center and guard. So he's kind of a better version of Cam Jurgens where they could play Jurgens at center, put JPJ at right guard, and then if Jurgens struggles, you can kind of just swap him. So, I mean, that would be an option, but you would have to take him in the first round. So, I mean, it depends on if they want to take somebody and make an investment there. But it's interesting because Jurgens kind of struggled at the end of the season at right guard, and now they're probably hoping that he works out at center because otherwise it could just be a wasted pick. Yeah,
it would be not my favorite pick, I will say. However, there's lots of potential, and I get the point of beefing up the trenches, which is what Howie Roseman loves to do. So it would also be interesting because you'd have like three players, I suppose, with center experience. So you'd have Landon Dickerson, Jackson Powers Johnson, Cam Jurgens, some versatility there if and when you needed it, to your point. Still, though, I don't know. I got to go back and forth. Real quick, too, just to ask, and I know people continue to throw it out there, but Tyler Steen, let's not forget about him. He's still a potential option. Sirianni said, hey, he played some snaps, made some progress, whatever there. But where do you expect him to fall? Is he a legit right guard option? Do we see him as kind of like a hybrid? I think you've talked about that as well, but what are his expectations on your mind?
Personally, heading into last season, I thought he should have been given the right guard job because in my mind, it was like if Jurgens is going to play center, there's no point in putting him at right guard. Like let him play center and let Steen eventually play right guard. But that didn't work out. I mean, I'm still high on Steen. I think he's a potentially great player. It's just last season kind of spoke volume to me because of what the Eagles did with him. It seemed like they didn't really want to put him out there unless they absolutely had to. So it's going to be interesting, excuse me, because he has that kind of guard tackle versatility where they might view him as their replacement for Jack Driscoll, where he can play off the bench and kind of play four of the five spots just whenever needed. So, I mean, we could see him do that. I think he'll compete for the right guard spot. I wouldn't be surprised if he won the job, but it's just a matter of what the team and Jeff Stoutland actually think about him.
Yeah, it's we love the depth, like you say. I mean, the Hennessy, the extra pieces that can play multiple positions. We've seen it is invaluable, certainly on game day with injuries and things like that. So, I don't know. Like I mentioned, first round is huge as always. Where are they going to go? Who are they going to select? I've been hoping for cornerback continually every single time. If anyone asks me, it's an immediate, obvious answer on my side because I feel like Quinyon Mitchell, not that it's realistic necessarily, but it's, if he's available there, I would love that. Given the visits, and again, I'll probably continue to ask you this on every single recording just to see if anything changes or what, adjusts from the top 30 visits. But as of today, the current prediction, which position do you feel like the Eagles are leaning towards in that first round selection?
I mean, people aren't going to like it, but it's probably going to be offensive line. It's just what they do.
Come on.
And Tyler Guy, I know. I don't want to say it, but it's just what this team does. It's going to probably be in the trenches on either side of the ball. I mean, they're already looking at edge rushers. They're looking at Tyler Guyton and plenty of other offensive linemen. So I said it months ago. I think Tyler Guyton might be their not so secret target because they always think 2-3 years ahead with these first round picks for the most part. So I mean, he'll probably be the guy, but it is encouraging that they're bringing in Edger and Cooper DeJean because those are two guys that would be immediate impact players in the defense and at positions that we don't usually see them invest in the first round. So that wouldn't shock me either. Obviously, that would be more like a sexy pick considering their needs for an immediate contributor. But it's just I'm not getting my hopes too high because we've seen what this team's done over the years. So
that's fair. Yeah, that's probably the better realistic option. And if we're betting on it, but it doesn't make me feel the greatest, as I've said. So, speaking of, I guess, the cornerback, and maybe they do shock the world and they draft a corner in the first round for the first time in forever. And maybe they don't. Howie Roseman had said at the NFL meetings, too, talking about cornerback, it was interesting, his comments of, being optimistic in Slay, saying he did a good job last year, which he did. I mean, he was the best corner. And you say good is relative, but still he was the best corner in terms of the team's gradings and things like that. But situation there, talking about, he also made mention of James Bradberry. Not a definitive statement, but it was much better than previously of saying, like a very quick, just like, oh yeah, we got plans for James Bradberry. That's it. So it was now of, well, we expect him or hope for him to return to form. We know that he feels that way. Does that make as well? But where are you at in terms of the cornerback room for the Eagles?
I think they just kind of came to the realization that nobody's going to probably trade anything for James Bradberry. So, and it really doesn't make financial sense for them to release him. So they're kind of just stuck with him and they're going to see how it plays out because maybe somebody will lose a starting corner in training camp or preseason or something like that. And then they'll be able to get like a late day 3 pick in the future for him. But it's just, that's what they have to do right now. They just have to hope that he could turn it around and with a new defensive coordinator, a new secondary coach, and see how that pans out. But I mean, Slay wasn't going to go anywhere, despite whatever happened last season with him talking to fans, whatever the case might be. He's still their best cornerback regardless. I mean, ideally, I think they want to see Kelee Ringo step up and just earn that starting job opposite of him. And he showed flashes at times. We've talked about it. So, I mean, ideally, they view him as their third-round pick this year, whatever the case might be. So, and he's still only 21 years old. So, I mean, the kid showed a lot of potential. He won a decent amount of matchups and coverage last season. So if he can continue building and kind of replace Bradberry next season, that would be great. But I wouldn't rule out them investing in position early because we already saw them break their tendencies with throwing a ton of money at Saquon Barkley. So I'm not really ruling anything out. They could go linebacker first round. They could go cornerback first round. It's just I'm done ruling things out and saying anything is a 0.0% chance of happening. So we'll see.
Howie did throw out the script. It's totally, despite what he may say, he was kind of knocking the notion of like, hey, it's an atypical offseason for you or some moves to be made. And he's, going back and saying we paid Brian Westbrook, paid LaShawn McCoy. So the Eagles haven't always been against that. And I guess you can somewhat agree with that. But at the same time, it's not a Howie Roseman thing. But, again, you have weapons. So to your point, we can stop speculating because it probably won't matter. He's going to do something different and just blow our minds. But it does feel like he's going for it. He's certainly investing quite a bit. Not mortgaging the future necessarily, but hey, you know what? We figure out, let's get guys here to make impacts, do what we need to. On that same to get Haas's contract extended or restructured done, and keep him here.
I think what we're probably going to see at this point is just he's going to do what Josh Sweat kind of did and just restructure his final year, and then so this way guarantees that he'll be in Philadelphia next season, and both parties can kind of move on next offseason, because clearly the trade market isn't what they were expecting, because he would have been traded already. The thing got way too public. Mm-hmm. Things don't get to that point unless they're really, really searching. So it kind of seems like that report where they were moving his guaranteed date back to April 1st was kind of their last kind of Hail Mary to kind of be like, come on, we want to make a deal before this guarantee kicks in. So, I mean, we'll see what happens. There's still time for something to happen. But right now, I think he probably just returns for one more season, and then they either just get a compensatory pick or whatever the case might be next offseason.
There you go. I'm that's not too bad, to be honestly. I mean, again, I know you could say like, well, it's better to have the draft pick early, but at the same time, I mean, if you have Haason Reddick, you got Bryce Huff, you got Josh Sweat, you got a little bit more depth there on that side. That's kind of exciting. I mean, certainly from I guess the pass rush in general, but the edge rush in particular. And you had another good article, which again is in the description for people to go check out. Make sure Anthony DeBona, Pro Football Network, is always the best. You guys know that. But you talked about analyzing I think the title, Analyzing Philadelphia's Loaded Group of Pass Rushers. How will Vic Fangio use those guys? Expectations there, and again, it may change, I suppose, if Haason Reddick is here, but still, just expectations in general for the edge rush group.
I mean, it's interesting because they're talking about potentially moving Reddick, and he might be the most seamless fit in Vic Fangio's defense because he has the most experience besides Zack Baun, who I think we'll get into, but he has the most experience of their group dropping into coverage. So, I mean, he's dropped into coverage 10.8% of his pass rushing snaps since kind of leaving Arizona, where they were trying to play him as a traditional off-ball linebacker. So, I mean, it's interesting because he kind of fits there the best, but he might be on the move. So, meanwhile, Josh Sweat never drops into coverage, and he's guaranteed to be there next season. So, and Bryce Huff never really dropped into coverage. Did a little bit in college, but not much in the pros. So, it'll be fun to see how things shake out because Vic Fangio likes to disguise things. He did it with his best pass rushers. He dropped Von Miller in coverage in Denver. So he dropped Khalil Mack in coverage in Chicago. So, I mean, it's not going to be the most pleasant thing to watch at times, but Jonathan Gannon doing it where it just seemed like it was always like a 3rd and long where they should not be dropping into coverage. And then next thing you know, a tight end's catching a pass on Haason Reddick or whatever the case might be. I think Fangio's going to be a little bit more strategic with how he does things, and he's created his scheme, obviously, so he knows best. So it'll just be fun to see how things shake out because they have a ton of depth right now along the edge.
Yeah. Well, all I can say is thank goodness to that. It'll be different because the initial takeaway, I think, from me and just about every Eagles fan is whenever you say it or we read about it or hear anything about, oh, we're going to take a pass rusher, our best pass rusher, and drop him back into coverage is what the bleep is basically going on. So, it's to your point, it'll be better for Fangio because he's going to install it and be able to teach the players, I think, better and also put them in the situation. They're going to have a lot more time, too, because that change, like we all saw in the middle of the season, Desai, Patricia, what's going on, play calling, different guy in your ear, all these other things, it can only get better. I know that's not the best statement there on the same side either, but still, yes, there's expectations, there's hype on players. Interestingly, with a Zack Baun, and we talked about him a little bit, I think, whenever there was an initial signing, but not a whole lot. Howie Roseman, basically, he didn't come right out and say the player, but reading between the lines in his quote, who he's referencing, we can put 2 and 2 together. He basically said, like, we know Vic Fangio likes the athletic players, likes linebackers who have that hybrid versatility. Zack Baun presents that, certainly. But essentially kind of referencing a Zack Baun being utilized like an Andrew Van Ginkel was in Miami, which is exciting, very exciting to see a player or to think of maybe the potential that he has there, especially if he's just a rotational piece on that side. Do you think that's possible, I guess, first off? Is that realistic expectations? But also, could you see him being utilized by Fangio pretty heavily like an Andrew Van Ginkel?
I mean, it's clearly that they were high on him because you don't sign a guy like that who didn't really make much as so early in free agency. So it was clearly a guy that Fangio must have told Roseman, like, hey, I see a lot of potential in this guy. Let's get him in the room and let's get him to work. So, I mean, clearly they have a vision for him. I mean, we saw what Fangio did with Andrew Van Ginkel last year. We talked about it. We talked about him as a potential target before he signed with, I believe, the Vikings in free agency. So it'll be interesting to see how Baun is used in Philadelphia because, like I mentioned, he has the most experience of all their edge guys dropping into coverage. In his NFL career in 4 years, he's dropped into coverage 18.4% of his snaps, which is way higher than anybody else. And if you look at Fangio's history, on average, his edge rushers drop into coverage around like 13.7% of the time. So, I mean, clearly he likes to use them in coverage. If they move on from Reddick, I think Baun's going to have an even bigger role. But I think right now, he's just a guy that he has the experience doing it. Excuse me. He has the experience doing it. He has the experience doing it in college as well. So he kind of played that role for the Saints where he was a do-it-all, jack-of-all trades. And the Eagles don't really have an edge that can do that right now. So I think he'll have a role moving forward.
It's exciting to think about, honestly. I mean, just the potential, like you said, someone who is familiar already, driving back, comfortable in that situation. So again, not necessarily the type of experience, the number of snaps to be played there, but if he's being utilized as a rotational guy, and he also brings in, I think it was Cam Jordan who had kind of been quoted as saying like, Baun is kind of a hidden potential, like a hidden gem. He's better at pass rushing. Once he got his moment, it wasn't a surprise that he actually, performed fairly well in limited snaps. So, again, anytime you have a player like that's going to speak up for you, that's saying a little bit. So hopefully he reaches that potential and gets up to the next level. Because, again, we all saw the defense. We know how much better it needs to be. However, I mean, the NFL, let's talk about it real briefly here, is not really helping out the defensive side of the ball with this most recent ruling of the hip drop tackle. So for anybody who's been living under a rock or has not seen anything, because it's been everywhere over the headlines, but essentially you cannot go and whenever, and usually it's from behind, sometimes from the side, but you basically can't go and, tackle someone, use your body weight to swing and kind of take the legs out, which helps naturally a lot of, players that are 20, 30, 40 pounds lighter than someone to be able to bring down a bigger tight end or even a, let's say running back or someone like that. It's just another emphasis on, yes, it's health. I'm totally for the health of all players. So first off, I'll clarify on that side. We both are. We're totally for all the health of players, but it's football and it's physical. It's competitive. It's dangerous. People can get injured. We all know that. And you see the reactions from NFL players all over on Twitter and social media and everything else. But what's your takeaway on the hip drop tackle being banned? What's the game going to look like? It's going to be a 15-yard penalty and an automatic first down too for those that are unaware. But how is this going to change the game?
I mean, I'm hoping the reports are true that are saying that it's not going to be like heavily officiated. They're kind of just using it as like a teaching, like a threat to teaching them where they can like find players during the week and it's not really going to impact the game as it's being played. But it's just, you have that in the back of your mind now that like there's going to be that one moment, crucial drive where now this guy can't get tackled in the open field. The guy's going to let up a little bit. It's just, it opens up too much to like interpretation. And I feel like those judgmental calls are always going to be an issue. And it's just going to be a matter of them actually enforcing it or not. So hopefully it's just them kind of threatening the players in a way and saying like, oh, like try to stop doing it or you're going to get penalized or fined or whatever the case might be. So I'm hoping it's just not officiated heavily. We kind of saw the mess that the being able to review pass interference was, and that became a whole problem because the NFL just didn't want to admit their mistakes with any of these pass interference calls.
Yeah.
So I mean, yeah, it's just, I don't know. It's tough because even JJ Watt said, he was like, right away he tweeted like, oh, let's just fast forward to wearing belts with the flags because this is, it's crazy. It's just like, but I joked also on Twitter that like maybe this is why Howie Roseman finally threw a ton of money on a running back because now you can't tackle big running backs. So if you can't tackle Saquon Barkley from behind and use your body weight to bring him down, maybe it was a great investment. So
it's true.
I mean, it's just you don't know where this is going to end up, and it's just funny because the NFL preaches player safety, but then at the same time, within a couple of years, they're probably going to add an 18th regular season game. So I mean, either you care about the guys or you care about money. It's just. It's tough. It seems like even the offensive players are like kind of frustrated by it. So it's like if the guys that are benefiting most from the rule don't like it, then you know it's a problem.
Yeah, yeah, and everyone knows what they sign up for. For whenever they play football, play in the NFL at the highest level. It happens all over the place. But I'm with you. It's kind of like the writing's on the wall when the players are seeing it. it's going to happen inevitably. It will happen. There's going to be a game. Hopefully it's not an Eagles game, or maybe if we're benefited by it, that's great. But still, like, hopefully it doesn't. But it'll be probably a high leverage, crucial situation. Maybe trying to chase down a player, and all of a sudden there it goes. And it's like, oh, is it called? Is it not called? Is it reviewed? People speculate. You talk about it. It feels like a no-win. Again, I'm for players' health and safety, but to your point, it might benefit the Eagles more so, and that's why Howie Roseman goes after these offensive players. So there's another bullet point for going after maybe another offensive weapon in the draft, because if this is the way that it continues to go, it just makes it that much easier. So we will see. But yes, I'm with you. It'll be interesting to see the full dynamic and change of this, especially with the refs impacting games already, and then you have the subjective call in there. Because even the video footage that the NFL put out of the change coming, some of the tackles there are like, okay, I can legit see that as a dangerous tackle. That guy got injured, but some of them were like, I mean, that kind of looked okay. Like I know that you're rolling up on someone, but that didn't look near as violent as some of the other ones. So it just leaves so much room for interpretation.
And then they're like, oh, it has to be a swivel and hip drop. It can't just be a hip drop. I'm like, this. You can't slow down the game in real time.
Swivel?
This is going to be a mess.
It will, yeah. Because again, to your point, it's like if we have this much, disunity as far as like what pass interference is, like, can you tell me what is pass interference? What is roughing the quarterback? Like, no one knows, because it's sometimes it gets called, sometimes it doesn't. Same deal. They'll be like, what's the definition of a swivel? Like, did he swivel there? Or did he not swivel? It's. So anyway, it'll be interesting. The NFL always choosing, but therefore the health and safety of the players, unless it's for profit. But anyway, we're not going to go there. So I'm excited to see that nonetheless. But no, I appreciate you hopping on here, talking all things birds. It's great as always. If you're not, make sure to go follow Anthony on Twitter. Got the link in the description at Debona PFN and all the great content. I think you've been cranking them out. You're like past 120 articles now. You just flew up there.
Yeah. Yep. And then now I'm writing a little bit more about the Eagles on PFN too, so be sure to check that out.
There you go. Absolutely. Well, appreciate it as always. And until next time, we will see you guys. Go Birds.